You're standing at the edge of a shaft cut 13 meters straight down into the bedrock west of Alexandria. The air coming up from it is wet, cold, older than anything you've ever breathed. And at the bottom of that shaft is a tunnel that should not exist. Here's what I believe, and what took me 2 years to stop arguing with myself about. The tomb of Cleopatra, the most famous lost grave in human history, the one the textbooks swear vanished forever, was never actually lost. It was hidden, sealed behind a mile of hand-carved rock, and then, by an accident of geology, dropped beneath the sea. Modern surveys keep finding pieces of it, and every piece fits a picture the official story can't hold. I'm going to take you to a coordinate, Taposiris Magna, roughly 45 kilometers from Alexandria, where a Dominican investigator named Kathleen Martinez has spent almost 20 years digging into a hillside everyone told her was empty. In November of 2022, she found something under it that a team of engineers called a geometric miracle. This is not legend. It's in her excavation reports, and I've read them until my eyes burned. I still remember the night it flipped for me. I was sitting with a printout of the temple's ground plan and a map of the Mediterranean coastline overlaid on top of it, and I noticed the tunnel wasn't pointing inland toward the burial ground everyone assumed. It was pointing at the water. That's when the boring explanation I'd been counting on quietly fell apart. So let me lay the whole thing out for you, the way I found it, piece by piece. Because once you see how the evidence stacks, you're not going to be able to unsee it either. Start with the death itself, because that's where every version of this story pretends to be certain. Cleopatra VII died in the summer of 30 BC. The last pharaoh of Egypt, the last of the Ptolemies, gone at 39 years old after Octavian's forces took Alexandria. Her lover, the Roman general Mark Antony, died days before her, bleeding out from a self-inflicted wound. The romantic version says a snake, a cobra smuggled in a basket of figs. That part may or may not be true, and honestly, it doesn't matter for what we're chasing. What matters is one line, written by the Greek historian Plutarch about 130 years later in his work known as The Life of Antony. Plutarch wrote that Octavian, the man who had just conquered her, permitted Cleopatra and Antony to be buried together in a single tomb with royal splendor. He describes her being laid beside him, two enemies of Rome entombed as one. And then the record just stops. That's the thing that first hooked me. We know Octavian allowed the burial. We have a contemporary adjacent source describing it. And then, for 2,000 years, nobody can tell you where that tomb went. Not one ancient writer records visiting it. No later pharaoh, no Roman emperor, no medieval traveler leaves a note saying, "I stood at Cleopatra's grave." A woman whose face was on coins across the entire Mediterranean world simply drops off the map the moment she's buried. For centuries, the assumption was simple. Her tomb was inside the royal quarter of Alexandria, near her palace, and that whole district slid into the sea during a series of earthquakes and tsunamis. Case closed. Underwater. Unreachable. Gone. But here's the first crack. When French marine archaeologists spent years mapping the sunken royal harbor of Alexandria, cataloging thousands of submerged blocks, statues, and sphinxes, they found the drowned palace district. They found columns and colossi. What they never found, not a fragment, not an inscription, not a sealed chamber, was anything that pointed to the tomb of Cleopatra and Antony. The place everyone said held her, held everything except her. Therefore, the question changes. Not where did the tomb sink, but why would a queen who spent her whole reign wrapping herself in the identity of a goddess be buried in a crowded harbor at all? That's the question that sent Kathleen Martinez to a hilltop temple nobody was taking seriously. Let me tell you about her, because you need to understand who was pulling this thread. Martinez isn't a lifelong Egyptologist who inherited a dig from her professor. She's a lawyer from the Dominican Republic. She got obsessed with Cleopatra, taught herself the archaeology, and built a legal-style case for a location based on evidence rather than tradition. She approached it the way you'd build a prosecution: motive, means, and a place that fit the character of the accused. And her argument came down to a name. The site is called Taposiris Magna. In the Old Tongue, that name carries the meaning of the great tomb of Osiris, the burial place of the god Osiris himself. Now here's why that detonates. Cleopatra didn't just rule Egypt. She presented herself, publicly and religiously, as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis. She wore the goddess's robes. She took the title New Isis. And Mark Antony, her partner, styled himself as the new Dionysus, the Greek god the Egyptians equated with Osiris. In the myth, Isis and Osiris are husband and wife. Osiris is murdered, his body scattered, and Isis gathers the pieces and resurrects him. It's the central love and death story of Egyptian religion, a tale of two lovers, one killed, the other reuniting them beyond death. So, think about what Martinez saw. A queen who called herself Isis, a general who called himself Osiris, a lover killed, a queen who followed him into death, and a temple whose very name means the tomb of Osiris, sitting on a hill, out of the way, dedicated to exactly those two gods. If you were Cleopatra, and you wanted to be buried not in a crowded harbor but in a place that would make your death a sacred reenactment of the greatest resurrection myth in your religion, this is the tomb you would choose. This is the only place that fits who she actually was. That's a beautiful theory. But a theory doesn't cut a mile of tunnel through rock. So what did she actually find? Start with the coins, because that's the moment the site stopped being a hunch. Inside the temple grounds, Martinez's team uncovered a cache of coins. Not generic currency coins bearing the name and the face of Cleopatra VII. Struck during her reign, someone in antiquity had a reason to place images of that specific queen inside this specific temple. Then came a headless statue of a royal figure, carved in a way that fit a Ptolemaic ruler. Then masks. Then a limestone bust. Then a beautiful alabaster head with the features of a queen. And then the foundation deposits. When ancient Egyptians dedicated a temple, they buried small ceremonial objects in the foundations, almost like a cornerstone with a signature. The deposits at Taposiris Magna tied the temple's dedication to the Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra's own family line. This wasn't a random ruin. It was a working royal temple, actively used and honored during the exact window when Cleopatra lived and died. Piece by piece, the hilltop that everyone had ignored was turning into the one place on earth that matched every part of the queen's identity. But a temple is not a tomb. And for years, that was the wall Martinez kept hitting. She had the right religion, the right dynasty, the right symbolism, the right coins. What she didn't have was a body or a chamber or a door, until the ground gave her something nobody expected. Here is where I need you to slow down with me, because this is the piece that turned my skepticism into something closer to fear. In 2022, the team discovered a tunnel beneath the temple, not a natural cave, a carved passage cut by human hands through solid rock, running 1,305 meters in length, about 2 meters high, sitting roughly 13 meters below the surface. And the engineering of it was so precise that it drew a comparison to one of the most celebrated feats of the ancient world. There is a tunnel on the Greek island of Samos, dug in the 6th century before Christ, called the Tunnel of Eupalinos. It's famous because the diggers started from both ends of a mountain and met in the middle with almost perfect accuracy. And achievement engineers still study today as one of the earliest examples of applied geometry. When specialists looked at the Taposiris tunnel, that's the comparison they reached for, a geometric miracle. Someone had invested staggering skill and labor to drive this passage through the earth on a deliberate line. You don't build that to store grain. You don't build that for water when there are easier ways to move water. A tunnel like that, beneath a temple named for the tomb of a god, on the site of a new Isis's chosen resurrection, that's not infrastructure. That's an approach. A ceremonial road to something meant never to be casually found. And when I traced the line of that tunnel, I got the chill I told you about at the start. Because it doesn't run into the safe, dry heart of the hill, it runs toward the sea. Now, this is the part of the investigation where I know exactly what you're thinking, because I thought it too, and I want to speak directly to you if you're the type who refuses to swallow a good story just because it's exciting. Stay with me here, because this section is built specifically for you, the skeptic, and it's the part that finally broke my own doubt. The reasonable objection goes like this. Every year, some headline screams that Cleopatra's tomb has been found. It's practically a genre. Egypt has thousands of temples, and archaeologists find coins and statues and tunnels all the time. A temple named for Osiris naturally contains images of gods and rulers. A cache of Cleopatra coins just means the temple operated during her reign, which we already knew. And a tunnel, however impressive, is just a tunnel maybe for water, maybe a quarry passage, maybe a service route. None of that is a body. None of it is a name on a sarcophagus. So why should this time be any different? That's the honest counterargument. I held it in my hands for a long time, and I'll tell you exactly where it breaks. It breaks on the pattern. A single coin means nothing. A single symbol means nothing. But look at how many independent lines all point at the same tiny hilltop. The name of the site matches the burial myth. The dedication of the temple matches Cleopatra's dynasty. The coins match her specifically, her face and her name. The dual god symbolism matches her and Antony's public religious identities down to the detail. The temple's own layout includes a deep necropolis where high-status individuals were buried close to the gods, including mummies found with gilded tongues, a burial practice meant to let the dead speak to Osiris in the afterlife. And then under all of it, a tunnel engineered with a precision that had no ordinary purpose and pointed at the water. Any one of those you can wave away. Feel that pull right now, the sense that the ordinary answer only survives if you agree to ignore half the evidence sitting in front of you. That's exactly the muscle the Lost Origins Complete Library was built to train. Across 3 digital volumes you can read on any device, no special app needed, the author lays out how to read contested findings without being fooled, the same grammar of evidence Martinez used to turn a name on a hillside into a case. First threshold shows you where the map runs out and the evidence begins. Deep Signal hands you the harder methods and sharper questions. And the bundle-exclusive Hidden Systems unifies every framework into one complete casebook you won't find anywhere else. Here's a test you can run for free tonight. Pull up Plutarch's Life of Antony yourself, read the line where Octavian permits the joint burial with royal splendor, and watch how the official story goes silent right after, just like the collection claims the record does. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. And this pattern isn't going anywhere. The coast keeps sinking, the tunnel stays flooded, so the skill of stacking evidence yourself only gets more useful the longer these cases stay open. Now hold that thought, because the strength here was never any single clue. All of them, stacked on the same spot, is not coincidence. That's a signature. And the more I tried to knock it down with the ordinary explanation, the more the ordinary explanation needed me to ignore evidence to keep it standing. That's the exact moment in any cold case when you stop trusting the official answer. Because here's the second thing the skeptic version conveniently forgets. This site has a reason to be empty, even if the tomb is really there, and that reason is written into the coastline itself. The northern coast of Egypt has been battered for 2,000 years. A catalog of earthquakes and tsunamis struck this region between roughly the 4th century and the 14th century of our era, the same waves and tremors that dropped a chunk of ancient Alexandria into the harbor. Taposiris Magna sits right on that vulnerable shore. Part of the ancient temple complex is now submerged beneath the Mediterranean. Divers have gone into the water off the site and found ruins under the surface, collapsed structures, worked stone, the drowned edge of a sacred place. So follow the logic all the way down. A tunnel cut with obsessive precision, running not inland but toward the sea, on a coast that has been dropping into that sea for 2,000 years, leading toward exactly the zone that geology has since swallowed. If the burial chamber was placed at the far, seaward end of that passage, the most protected, most hidden point, the deepest secret of the whole design, then the same earthquakes that hid the royal palace would have carried Cleopatra's tomb under the water too. Not destroyed, sealed, flooded, placed beyond the reach of grave robbers and armies and every treasure hunter for 20 centuries by an accident of the earth that the builders never planned but that finished the job of hiding her perfectly. That's not a tomb that was lost. That's a tomb that was protected first by human genius and then by the sea. And this is the point where the story stops being just a mystery and starts making me angry because of what happened next. For years, the mainstream response to Martinez was polite dismissal. She wasn't part of the traditional Egyptological establishment. She was a foreigner, a lawyer, a woman with a theory that sounded too romantic to be science. I read the tone in the old coverage, the gentle eye rolling, the assumption that she'd wasted a career chasing a fantasy on a hill. She dug season after season with limited support, while the consensus quietly waited for her to fail and go home. She didn't go home. She found the coins. She found the statues. She found the necropolis. And she found the tunnel that made engineers reach for the word miracle. And even after all that, notice what still hasn't happened. There has been no massive, fully funded, all-hands international effort to drive down that tunnel to its flooded end and settle this once and for all. The single most famous missing grave in the history of the world, with a trail of physical evidence this strong, and the response has been cautious, slow, underpowered. When the answer might be sitting under a few meters of Mediterranean water at the end of a passage we've already found, that hesitation stops looking like scientific caution and starts looking like something else. like an establishment that would rather leave a question open than admit an outsider was reading the evidence correctly the whole time. But the evidence keeps talking anyway, and it just said something new, because part of that tunnel is already underwater. When the length of the passage was mapped, investigators realized a section of it had flooded that it extended toward, and partly beneath, the water table and the sea. Divers described going into submerged portions of the site. Think about what that means physically. You are following a 2,000-year-old carved road under the ground, and at some point the dry rock gives way to standing water, and the passage keeps going into the dark beneath the Mediterranean. The end of it hasn't been reached. The deepest, wettest, most sealed segment, the exact part where a builder obsessed with secrecy would place the thing worth hiding, is the part still waiting under the water. That's the frontier right now, not a legend. A specific, mapped, partially explored tunnel with a flooded end that no one has fully followed. So let me hand you the piece that finally landed for me, the thing that made me sure I wasn't chasing another empty headline. Go back to the name one more time, because the ancients were not careless with names. Taposiris Magna, the great tomb of Osiris. For a long time, everyone treated that as poetic, a temple honoring the god of the dead, nothing more. But Martinez treated it as a literal instruction. In the religion Cleopatra lived and breathed, Osiris is the god who dies and is buried and rises again, gathered back together by Isis. A place literally called the Tomb of Osiris is the one place on earth where a queen who called herself Isis, whose lover called himself the new Osiris, could stage her own death as the final act of that myth, dying as the goddess, joining her murdered god in the god's own tomb, to be resurrected forever. Now layer on what modern survey work has actually confirmed at that spot: the temple's dedication to her dynasty, the coins with her own face, the dual god symbolism matching her and Antony precisely, the elite necropolis with the gilded-tongued mummies who wanted to speak to Osiris, the mile-long tunnel of impossible precision pointing at the sea, and the C-word flooded end of that tunnel diving into water that the earth has been raising over this coast for 2,000 years. Every single one of those is documented, every one of them independently, and they all converge on one hilltop and one flooded passage. Here's the reveal that reframes the entire 2,000-year-old mystery. Cleopatra's tomb was never lost the way we were told. It wasn't dropped anonymously into a harbor and forgotten. It was designed to disappear. A queen who understood death as theater, built her resurrection into a temple whose name announced exactly what it was, hid the chamber at the end of a tunnel, engineered like a sacred puzzle, and trusted symbolism so total that no one for 20 centuries thought to read the name of the place as a literal address. And then the sea did the rest, sealing the last stretch underwater so completely that even now, with the tunnel found and mapped, we are standing at the edge of the flooded section, staring into the dark, one dive away from an answer. The tomb isn't gone. It's waiting at the wet end of a passage we have already touched. I sat with that for a long time. The most hunted grave in history, and the clue to it was hiding in plain sight in the name printed on the site, for anyone to read, dismissed as poetry, by everyone except one outsider who took it as a map. That's the feeling I can't shake, and I don't think you'll shake it either now that you've seen the pieces line up. The answer was never buried by time. It was buried by everyone deciding too early that they already knew where it wasn't. If you felt it too, that quiet refusal to accept it sank somewhere, we'll never know. As the end of the greatest disappearance in the ancient world, then you already know why I couldn't let this one go. You're the kind of person who reads the name on the door before you believe the sign that says the room is empty, so I want to hear from you. The tunnel points at the sea, and its far end is already underwater, unexplored. Do you think the burial chamber is intact down there, sealed and flooded and waiting? Or do you think the earthquakes that took the coast crushed it long ago? Tell me exactly where you land on that, and tell me why. And drop a comment telling me what part of the world you're watching from, because I read every place name that comes in, and it still amazes me how far these cases travel. If you want to keep reopening the ones everyone else filed under solved, come deeper into this with me, because next I'm following a set of gilded-tongued mummies pulled from that same necropolis, and one of them was found with a detail on the burial that doesn't match anything in the standard Ptolemaic record. That thread goes somewhere I did not expect, and I don't think the official explanation survives it either. The queen who called herself a goddess built her tomb to be unfindable. She almost succeeded, but almost is the word that keeps me digging, and I think it keeps you here too. This video walked you to the edge, but the full case for Taposiris Magna, evidence by evidence, picking up right where I stopped, waits inside the unexplained society. In there, you can ask me your own questions. And a real person, me, answers you myself. Never a machine. And you won't puzzle over it alone. You belong here with mystery lovers like you. Just point your phone's camera at the code. Cancel anytime, one click. Now, if that amazed you, wait until you see what comes next. Scientists rebuilt the face of an ancient pharaoh, and what they uncovered will truly astonish you. That video is starting right here.